You are not suffering from life, but from the way you judge every moment inside your mind. You keep handing your confidence to reactions that rise without permission and fade without truth. You let other people's words shape your sense of worth and then wonder why your inner state never stays steady. This is not confusion from the world. It is lack of governance over your own judgment. What follows is a direct Stoic examination of how self-respect is built through disciplined thinking and controlled response. If you are willing to question your automatic interpretations and return to reason each time emotion tries to lead, then stay with this. If you want to continue this path of clear thinking and inner discipline, you can subscribe and remain with others who are practicing the same return to reason each day. Nothing here asks for belief without examination, only attention and honesty. Number 1. Distinguish what you control from what you cannot. The day you stop separating what belongs to you from what does not, your mind becomes a battlefield you can never win. You wake up already defeated because your peace depends on people changing their opinions, your confidence depends on outcomes you cannot command, and your sense of worth hangs on events that were never placed under your authority. Then you wonder why your mind is restless. You wonder why your self-respect collapses so easily. You wonder why one insult ruins your day and one rejection makes you question your entire life. The answer is simple and hard at the same time. You have handed your inner life over to things that were never yours to govern. Look carefully at your suffering. Do not run from it now. Sit with it honestly. How much of your pain comes from trying to control another person's thoughts? How much comes from demanding certainty from the future? How much comes from replaying the past as if your mind can rewrite what has already happened? You exhaust yourself fighting wars against reality itself and then call this weakness fate. It is not fate. It is confusion. It is the refusal to understand the first law of a disciplined life. Some things are within your control and some things are not. Your opinions are yours. Your choices are yours. Your effort is yours. Your discipline is yours. Your ability to speak truthfully is yours. Your ability to remain calm under pressure is yours. Your character is yours. These belong to you completely. No man can steal them unless you surrender them willingly. But the approval of others is not yours. The behavior of your family is not yours. The economy is not yours. The weather is not yours. Your reputation is not fully yours because it exists in the minds of other people. Even your body is not completely yours because illness and age can still touch it despite your efforts. Death itself will arrive whether you argue with it or not. The undisciplined mind refuses this truth. It keeps reaching outside itself, trying to force life into obedience. It says, I will be calm once everyone respects me. I will feel worthy once I succeed. I will trust myself once nobody criticizes me. But this person has chained their peace to conditions they do not control. They have become servants to circumstance. Every day they wake up vulnerable because the foundation of their confidence rests on unstable ground. A strong self-esteem cannot be built on unstable ground. It cannot depend on applause because applause disappears. It cannot depend on status because status changes. It cannot depend on appearance because appearance fades. It cannot depend on comfort because comfort is temporary. If your worth depends on anything outside your own reasoned choices, then fear will follow you everywhere. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of judgment. You will spend your life protecting an identity built from things that can vanish overnight. This is why your confidence collapses under pressure. You trained yourself to value what was never truly yours. You measured your worth through the eyes of strangers instead of through the quality of your own actions. Then when strangers changed their opinions, your entire inner world shook with them. But the disciplined person does not live this way. They return again and again to the only place freedom exists, their own judgments, their own actions, their own character. When someone insults you, your first impulse is reaction. Your chest tightens, your mind races, you feel the urge to defend yourself immediately. But pause and examine what is happening. Their words are outside your control. Their opinion is outside your control. But your judgment about those words belongs entirely to you. The insult itself does not break your peace. Your judgment about the insult breaks your peace. You tell yourself, this should not happen. They should respect me. I cannot tolerate this. Then anger rises from your own interpretation. The disciplined mind catches this process before it takes control. This does not mean becoming passive. It does not mean accepting injustice without action. It means understanding where your true power exists. You cannot command another person's mouth, but you can govern your response. You cannot prevent criticism, but you can refuse to let criticism define your worth. That is strength. Not controlling others, controlling yourself. You say you want stronger self-esteem, yet every day you abandon yourself emotionally to things outside your authority. One difficult conversation destroys your confidence. One failed attempt makes you question your abilities. One moment of embarrassment becomes a prison in your memory for years. Why? Because you are treating external events as measures of your value. But events do not measure character. Choices measure character. Effort measures character. Integrity measures character. A person who acts with honesty after failure possesses more dignity than a liar praised by crowds. A person who keeps discipline during hardship possesses more worth than someone admired only during comfort. You must stop evaluating yourself through outcomes alone. Outcomes are never fully yours. The disciplined effort behind them is yours. Judge yourself there. Every morning, ask yourself one question before you begin the day. What belongs to me today? Not what do I hope happens, not what do I fear might happen. Ask what is actually under my control right now. Your attention is under your control. Your willingness to work is under your control. Your ability to speak with restraint is under your control. Your ability to endure discomfort without complaint is under your control. Begin there. Build your life there. Then ask the second question. What does not belong to me today? The reactions of others, delays, traffic, mistakes already made, random events, praise, criticism, the future. Once you identify these things, stop mentally wrestling with them. You cannot build peace while arguing with reality every hour. Watch how much energy leaves your body when you stop demanding control over what was never yours. Watch how much clearer your mind becomes when you stop chasing certainty from uncontrollable outcomes. The disciplined mind grows lighter because it carries only what belongs to it. But understand this clearly. Knowing this principle intellectually changes nothing. You must train it daily. The mind does not become disciplined through agreement alone. It becomes disciplined through repetition under pressure. So begin practicing immediately. When plans fail today, do not react automatically. Stop. Ask yourself whether the failure was fully within your control. If it was not, then release the demand that reality should have obeyed you. Focus only on your response. If someone disrespects you today, pause before speaking. Feel the emotion rise without surrendering your judgment to it. Tell yourself their behavior belongs to them. My response belongs to me. This pause is not weakness. It is mastery. Animals react instantly. Rational beings examine before acting. The gap between stimulus and response is where self-respect is built. Every time you refuse impulsive reaction, you strengthen your inner authority. You keep saying you want peace, yet you practice chaos daily. You rehearse imaginary arguments in your mind. You revisit old humiliations repeatedly. You predict disasters before they happen. Then you wonder why anxiety follows you everywhere. Your attention has become enslaved to things beyond your command. Train your attention like a guard standing at the gate of a city. Do not allow every fear, every insult, every external event to enter your inner world without examination. Ask yourself constantly, is this within my control? If the answer is no, then do not feed it with endless thought. Accept it as reality and return to your own conduct. This discipline feels uncomfortable at first because your mind is addicted to interference. It believes constant worry creates control. It believes obsession prevents pain, but worry does not command events. It only weakens the person worrying. You cannot think reality into obedience. You can only prepare yourself to meet reality with steadiness. The person with strong self-esteem is not the person who always succeeds. It is the person who remains internally governed, regardless of success or failure. Their worth does not rise with praise or collapse with criticism, because they measure themselves differently. They ask only one thing at the end of each day. Did I govern myself with reason and integrity? Imagine how different your life becomes once you stop depending on uncontrollable things for emotional stability. Rejection no longer destroys you because another person's choice does not define your character. Failure no longer humiliates you because effort and discipline remain within your authority. Delays no longer consume your peace because you stopped expecting reality to move according to your personal demands. This is freedom, not freedom from difficulty, freedom from unnecessary emotional slavery. You have spent enough years reacting blindly, enough years blaming circumstances for the condition of your inner life, enough years demanding control over people, events, and outcomes that never belonged to you. Now the responsibility returns to where it has always been. Your judgments, your choices, your discipline. There will still be pain. Do not misunderstand this teaching. Stoicism does not promise a painless life. Illness will still come. Loss will still come. Betrayal will still come. Death will still come. But suffering multiplies when the mind refuses reality and demands guarantees the world cannot provide. The disciplined person grieves when grief is natural, but they do not collapse into bitterness because they never expected life to obey their wishes completely. Look honestly at yourself now. How many hours have you wasted fighting what already exists? How much peace have you sacrificed trying to control another person's mind? How much strength have you lost replaying the unchangeable past? Your life is finite. Every moment spent resisting uncontrollable things is a moment stolen from self-governance. This is why self-esteem must be rooted in virtue alone. Virtue cannot be taken from you by bad luck. A disciplined mind remains possible during hardship. Courage remains possible during fear. Honesty remains possible during pressure. Patience remains possible during delay. These belong to you in every condition unless you abandon them voluntarily. Do not wait for confidence before practicing discipline. Discipline creates confidence. Every time you govern your reaction instead of obeying impulse, you prove to yourself that you are capable of reason. Every time you accept reality instead of complaining against it, you strengthen your inner stability. Every time you focus on your own conduct instead of controlling others, you reclaim authority over your life. Tonight before sleep, examine yourself honestly. Where did you waste energy trying to control what was not yours? Where did you surrender your peace to external events? Where did you react instead of choose? Do not excuse yourself. Do not condemn yourself either. Observe yourself clearly. Then correct yourself tomorrow. This daily examination is necessary because the undisciplined mind returns constantly. Pride returns, fear returns, anger returns. The desire to control everything returns. You must train against these tendencies every day the same way the body requires repeated exercise to remain strong. When you wake tomorrow, remember this before touching your phone, before entering the noise of the world, before chasing approval and outcomes. Your mind is your responsibility. Your choices are your responsibility. Your character is your responsibility. Everything else moves according to forces larger than your desires. Once you understand this deeply, something changes inside you. You stop begging life to protect your comfort. You stop demanding certainty before action. You stop collapsing emotionally whenever reality refuses your expectations. You become harder to shake because your center no longer depends on external stability. And understand this final truth carefully. The world respects the person who governs themselves because such a person cannot easily be manipulated. Praise does not intoxicate them, fear does not paralyze them, difficulty does not destroy them. They remain steady because they built their life on what truly belongs to them. Your time is shorter than you think. One day this body will weaken. One day every distraction, every ambition, every argument, every possession will disappear. At that moment only one question will matter. Did you govern yourself well while you were alive? Did you waste your years chasing control over what was never yours? Or did you build strength where true authority actually existed? Stop running from this work. Stop postponing self-examination. Stop expecting peace without discipline. The path is already clear. Separate what is yours from what is not. Govern what belongs to you completely. Accept what does not belong to you calmly. Return to this practice every single day until your confidence no longer depends on the changing world, but on the strength of your own reasoned character. Number 2. Master your judgments before they master your confidence. A single thought can turn a calm morning into a day of anger, fear, envy, or shame before the sun has even fully risen. Not because the world changed in that moment, but because your judgment changed. One message arrives and you immediately decide you are being disrespected. One mistake happens and you instantly decide you are incapable. One person looks away from you and your mind creates rejection from silence alone. Then you walk through the rest of the day carrying suffering that began not in reality but in interpretation. This is the danger of an unexamined mind. It does not wait for truth. It rushes toward conclusions. It reacts before understanding. It treats first impressions as facts and emotional impulses as wisdom. Then it wonders why confidence collapses so easily. Your confidence cannot remain stable if every passing judgment is allowed to govern your inner state. A mind without discipline becomes a servant to appearances. It sees difficulty and calls it disaster. It sees criticism and calls it humiliation. It sees discomfort and calls it unbearable. You say you want stronger self-esteem, yet your own judgments attack you more brutally than any enemy ever could. Another person may insult you once, but your own mind repeats the insult for years. Another person may doubt your ability briefly, but your own thoughts keep the accusation alive long after the moment has passed. You are not only wounded by events, you are wounded by the meaning you attach to them. Look honestly at how quickly your mind creates suffering from assumptions. Someone does not answer your message, and you decide you are unwanted. A plan fails, and you decide your future is ruined. You feel anxiety and immediately judge yourself as weak. Yet none of these judgments were forced upon you. They were accepted without examination. This is how confidence erodes, not through external events alone, but through the habit of believing every fearful interpretation your mind produces. The disciplined life begins the moment you stop bowing before your first reaction. Your first impression is not wisdom, it is only an appearance entering the mind. It arrives quickly, often carrying emotion with it, but speed does not make it true. A rational person learns to pause before agreement. They do not let anger decide reality for them. They do not let fear define the future. They examine each judgment carefully before allowing it to shape their actions. This pause changes everything. Without it, you become mechanical. Someone criticizes you, and anger controls your tongue before reason can speak. Something uncomfortable happens, and complaint escapes your mouth before understanding arrives. A difficulty appears, and your confidence disappears instantly because your mind has already declared defeat. But when you create space between impression and judgment, you reclaim authority over yourself. You must understand how much power your judgments hold over your emotional life. Two people can face the same hardship while experiencing entirely different states of mind. One sees challenge and becomes stronger. Another sees punishment and becomes bitter. One sees failure as instruction. Another sees failure as proof of worthlessness. The event itself does not determine the condition of the soul. Judgment does. This is why the disciplined person guards the mind carefully, not with denial, not with false positivity, but with reasoned examination. When difficulty appears, they ask, "What exactly has happened here?" Not, "What am I afraid this means?" Not, "What story does my insecurity want to create?" They separate fact from interpretation. A difficult conversation is a fact. Deciding that you are unloved forever is interpretation. Losing money is a fact. Declaring yourself ruined as a human being is interpretation. Feeling fear before action is a fact. Judging yourself as weak because fear exists is interpretation. Once you begin separating reality from emotional exaggeration, your inner life becomes clearer and steadier. Your mind has likely spent years practicing the opposite. It has trained itself to dramatize discomfort and personalize every obstacle. It treats inconvenience like injustice. It treats criticism like destruction. It treats uncertainty like danger. Then it wonders why peace feels impossible. But peace was never possible for a mind that refuses to examine itself honestly. You must stop trusting every thought simply because it appears inside your head. The undisciplined person believes whatever emotion speaks loudest in the moment. The disciplined person questions it. They ask whether this judgment aligns with reason or merely with impulse. They ask whether the mind is seeing clearly or reacting blindly. This practice requires courage because many of your judgments feel familiar enough to seem true. You have repeated certain thoughts for so many years, they now sound like your identity. You tell yourself you are not capable enough, not respected enough, not confident enough, not disciplined enough. Then your actions begin serving these judgments as if they were permanent facts carved into reality. But these thoughts were strengthened through repetition, not proven through truth. The mind becomes what it repeatedly agrees with. If you continually accept weak judgments, your confidence weakens. If you continually accept resentful judgments, your character hardens into bitterness. If you continually accept fearful judgments, your life shrinks smaller and smaller until caution becomes your prison. You are shaping your inner world every hour through what you choose to believe. This is why morning discipline matters deeply. Before the world enters your attention, sit quietly and prepare the mind deliberately. Do not immediately rush toward noise, distraction, and reaction. Ask yourself what judgments must be guarded against today. You already know your patterns. Perhaps you become angry when ignored. Perhaps you collapse under criticism. Perhaps you seek validation from others constantly. Perhaps you avoid discomfort by inventing excuses. Bring these tendencies into the light before the day begins. Then prepare your reason against them. Tell yourself clearly that another person's mood cannot determine your worth. Tell yourself that discomfort is not harm. Tell yourself that mistakes are opportunities for correction, not proof of failure. Speak to your own mind firmly before the world does it for you. This is not empty affirmation. It is mental preparation for reality. The disciplined person expects challenge because life contains challenge naturally. They do not enter the day demanding comfort from every moment. They enter ready to govern their judgments regardless of circumstances. As the day unfolds, practice catching judgments in real time. When irritation rises, ask yourself what belief is creating this reaction. When anxiety appears, ask yourself what future outcome you are trying to control. When envy enters, ask yourself why another person's fortune has become a measure of your own value. Bring every disturbance before reason like a case before a judge. You will discover something uncomfortable through this process. Much of your suffering comes not from life itself, but from the demands your mind places upon life. You demand certainty where none exists. You demand constant approval from imperfect people. You demand ease in a world where struggle is unavoidable. Then anger appears when reality refuses your demands. The disciplined mind removes these false expectations slowly and deliberately. It stops insisting that every person behave correctly. It stops expecting every effort to succeed immediately. It stops believing that confidence means never feeling fear. Confidence built through Stoic practice is quieter and stronger than that. It is the trust that regardless of what happens, you can still choose your response with reason. Think about how much of your life has been ruled by emotional judgments accepted too quickly. How many arguments began because you assumed bad intentions without evidence? How many opportunities were abandoned because you judged yourself incapable before trying? How many peaceful moments were ruined because your mind wandered into imagined futures and treated them as present dangers? You cannot govern your life while refusing to govern your interpretations. The outer world enters through the gate of judgment. If that gate remains unguarded, then every insult, every fear, every temptation, every insecurity gains immediate control over your state of mind. This does not mean becoming emotionless. Emotions will arise naturally. Fear may visit before difficult action. Sadness may arrive after loss. Anger may appear when confronted with injustice. The disciplined person does not pretend these reactions never occur. They simply refuse to surrender authority to them blindly. They feel emotion without becoming possessed by it. When anger rises, do not say, "I am angry, therefore my judgment must be correct." Examine the judgment beneath the emotion. When fear rises, do not immediately obey it. Ask whether danger truly exists, or whether the mind is inventing catastrophe from uncertainty. When shame appears, do not collapse beneath it automatically. Ask whether your actions violated your principles, or whether your pride merely suffered discomfort. This examination requires patience because the mind prefers speed. Impulse wants immediate agreement. Reason requires observation. Yet every moment of honest examination strengthens self-respect, because you prove to yourself that you are capable of governing your own thoughts instead of being dragged by them. A person who cannot examine their judgments becomes predictable to every external force. Praise controls them easily because they depend on approval. Criticism controls them easily because they fear rejection. Comfort controls them easily because they avoid discomfort. But the disciplined person becomes steadier because they no longer treat every internal reaction as command. At night, return to yourself honestly. Sit in silence and review the judgments that shaped your day. Where did you exaggerate harm? Where did you assume the worst unnecessarily? Where did pride distort your interpretation? Where did fear speak louder than reason? This evening examination is not meant for self-hatred. It is meant for correction. A rational mind improves through awareness, not denial. Do not expect perfection from yourself immediately. The mind has practiced undisciplined judgment for years. It will continue rushing toward old habits. But every time you interrupt automatic thinking with examination, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen rational authority. Understand the urgency of this work. Your life is being shaped every day by the quality of your judgments. Your relationships, your peace, your confidence, your decisions, your character, all are influenced by the thoughts you repeatedly accept without question. If those judgments remain weak, fearful, resentful, or impulsive, then your life will continue reflecting that disorder outwardly. But if you begin training the mind carefully, your entire inner world changes. Criticism becomes information instead of destruction. Delays become exercises in patience instead of excuses for anger. Failure becomes instruction instead of humiliation. Uncertainty becomes a place to practice courage instead of panic. The disciplined mind is not born strong. It becomes strong through repeated correction, through refusing self-deception, through questioning impulsive interpretations, through returning again and again to reason, no matter how loudly emotion demands control. You have already seen what happens when judgments rule your confidence. You become unstable because every external event gains power over your inner state. Now choose differently. Examine before agreeing. Pause before reacting. Question before believing. Let reason become the authority within you rather than impulse. Your confidence will not become steel strong through praise from others. It will become strong when you can sit with your own thoughts honestly without becoming their servant. It will become strong when you stop fearing temporary emotions and start governing the judgments beneath them. It will become strong when your mind learns to say, "This impression has appeared, but I will examine it carefully before giving it power over my life." That is the beginning of real inner freedom. Not controlling the world, controlling the agreement of your own mind. Number 3. Reject external praise and anchor worth in virtue. You are still waiting for something outside you to confirm what only your character can already prove. A look of approval, a word of praise, a sign that others see you as worthy. And in that waiting, your inner life quietly weakens. Not because people are cruel, but because you have handed them authority over your sense of worth. You have allowed external voices to sit where your own reason should rule. Look closely at what praise does to you. It lifts you for a moment and then leaves you dependent on its return. It makes you chase the next compliment as if your stability depends on it. It trains your mind to look outward for permission to feel steady. And the moment that permission is withdrawn, even slightly, your confidence begins to tremble. This is not strength. This is dependence disguised as confidence. You say you want self-respect, yet you measure yourself by applause that you do not control. You shape your behavior around how others might respond instead of whether your actions are just, disciplined, and rational. You hesitate to speak truthfully because approval might be lost. You exaggerate your achievements because silence feels like invisibility. You hide your mistakes because being seen clearly feels dangerous. In all of this, you are not living by virtue, you are living by reaction. Understand this clearly. External praise is not evil. It is simply unreliable. It belongs to other people, and other people are governed by shifting moods, limited understanding, and personal bias. To anchor your worth in something so unstable is to build your identity on ground that moves constantly beneath your feet. No structure of confidence can remain stable under such conditions. The disciplined mind removes this dependence at the root. It stops asking the world to define its value. It returns that responsibility inward where it belongs. Your worth is not determined by being seen as impressive. It is determined by how you choose to act when no one is watching, when no reward is guaranteed, when no recognition is offered. Virtue is the only reliable measure because virtue depends entirely on your own choices. You already know this truth in moments of clarity. When you act with honesty, even if it is unnoticed, there is a quiet steadiness in you. When you choose restraint instead of impulse, even if no one applauds, there is a subtle dignity in that act. When you do what is right, even if it brings no immediate benefit, you feel something stable inside that praise has never been able to create. That feeling is not accidental, it is alignment with reason. But the mind quickly forgets this when it becomes hungry for validation. It begins comparing itself constantly. It watches how others are perceived and measures itself against that image. It begins performing instead of acting. It starts asking, how will this look, instead of, is this right? And slowly, your actions drift away from your principles and toward public approval. This is where inner instability begins, because once approval becomes your goal, your peace becomes fragile. You are no longer guided by what is correct, but by what is rewarded. You are no longer anchored in reason, but in reaction. And because reward is inconsistent, your sense of self becomes inconsistent as well. You must confront a difficult truth. Much of what you call insecurity is not a lack of ability. It is a habit of outsourcing judgment. You do not trust your own evaluation of your actions, so you borrow the evaluations of others. You wait for external confirmation before allowing yourself to feel steady. But a mind that cannot stand on its own reasoning will always wobble under the weight of external opinion. Start observing how often you silently seek approval before acting. Before speaking, you imagine how it will be received. Before making a decision, you imagine how it will be judged. Before pursuing something meaningful, you imagine how it will be perceived by others. In each case, you are not asking what is right. You are asking what will be accepted. And this subtle shift determines the direction of your entire life. The disciplined life requires a reversal of this habit. Instead of asking, how will this be seen, you ask, is this aligned with reason and virtue? Instead of asking, will I be praised, you ask, will I remain honest and just in this action? Instead of asking, will others approve, you ask, will I respect myself afterward? This is the return of authority to the inner self. Begin practicing this immediately in small moments. When you feel the urge to adjust your behavior for approval, pause. Notice the impulse clearly. Do not suppress it and do not obey it blindly. Examine it. Ask yourself whether the action you are about to take would still be correct if no one ever knew about it. If the answer is no, then you already know it is not grounded in virtue. If the answer is yes, then external opinion becomes irrelevant. This practice slowly detaches your identity from the need for recognition. It trains your mind to evaluate actions by internal standards instead of external reaction. Over time, you begin to notice something important. Praise no longer excites you as deeply, and criticism no longer disturbs you as violently. Not because you have become indifferent, but because you have stopped treating them as measures of truth. You will also begin to see how praise can distort judgment. It makes you believe you are further along than you are. It encourages complacency. It tempts you to repeat behaviors that are rewarded even if they are not aligned with integrity. A mind that depends on praise becomes easily manipulated without realizing it. It starts serving approval instead of principle. Criticism reveals the same weakness in reverse. When worth depends on external judgment, even small disapproval feels like collapse. A single negative opinion can undo confidence built over days or weeks, not because the opinion is powerful, but because your sense of self has been placed in its hands. You have given others the authority to define your internal condition. This is why virtue must become your only anchor. Virtue is not controlled by audience. It does not depend on recognition. It does not fluctuate with popularity. It exists entirely in your own choices. When you act with honesty, you possess it. When you act with courage, you possess it. When you act with discipline, you possess it. No one can remove it unless you abandon it yourself. When you begin to live this way, something subtle but profound changes in your experience of daily life. You stop rehearsing conversations in your mind just to impress imagined listeners. You stop exaggerating stories to gain attention. You stop hiding your mistakes to protect an image. Your speech becomes simpler because it no longer carries the burden of performance. Your actions become cleaner because they are no longer shaped by audience expectation. At first, this may feel like loss. The mind is used to the stimulation of approval. It is used to the small surge of satisfaction when others approve, and the discomfort when they do not. But beneath this fluctuation, there is a deeper stability waiting to be discovered. A stability that does not rise and fall with external response. You must train yourself to recognize the difference between feeling good and being good. Feeling good depends on reaction. Being good depends on action aligned with reason. One is temporary and fragile, the other is steady and independent. If you confuse the two, you will continue chasing experiences that feel rewarding while slowly losing control of your character. Each day offers countless opportunities to choose between virtue and approval. You will face moments where honesty might not be popular, where discipline might not be admired, where restraint might not be understood. In those moments, your old conditioning will urge you to adjust yourself for acceptance. That is the moment to pause and return to principle. Ask yourself one simple question before each important action. Am I doing this because it is right or because it will be praised? If it is only for praise, you are abandoning yourself. If it is for what is right, you are strengthening your inner foundation regardless of outcome. In the beginning, you will still feel the pull of external validation. That is natural. Years of conditioning do not disappear instantly, but each time you choose principle over approval, you weaken that dependency. Each time you act without seeking recognition, you restore authority to your own judgment. Each time you accept that silence may follow virtue, you become less dependent on noise to feel worthy. At night, examine your day with honesty. Identify where you adjusted your behavior for acceptance. Identify where you avoided truth to protect image. Identify where you allowed praise or fear of disapproval to influence your actions. Do not judge yourself harshly. Observe clearly. Correction begins with awareness, not punishment. Over time, this practice builds a different kind of confidence. Not the loud confidence that seeks attention, but the quiet confidence that does not require it. You begin to trust your own judgment because it is no longer constantly outsourced. You begin to respect your own actions because they are no longer shaped by performance. You begin to feel steady even in silence because your worth is no longer waiting to be confirmed. This is the foundation of a strong inner life. Not being praised more, but needing it less. Not avoiding criticism, but no longer being defined by it. Not seeking recognition, but acting in such a way that recognition becomes unnecessary for self-respect. If you continue down this path with discipline, you will notice something unmistakable. External approval will still come and go, but it will no longer rule you. It will pass through your life without determining your direction. And in that space, where approval once ruled, you will find something far more stable. A mind governed by reason, anchored in virtue, and no longer dependent on the opinions of others to know its own worth. Number 4. Examine your thoughts each morning and correct them. You wake up each day already surrounded by thoughts that were not examined, not chosen, and not corrected. They arrive before you have even taken full control of your attention. A worry about what might go wrong, a memory of something that went badly, a judgment about yourself that feels familiar but was never questioned, and if you do nothing with them, they quietly begin to govern your entire day. This is how a mind loses its authority. Not through one dramatic collapse, but through silent acceptance of untested thoughts. You let impressions pass through your mind as if they were truths, simply because they appeared early and often. Then you act as though these thoughts are reality itself, when in fact they are only raw material waiting to be examined. The undisciplined mind treats every morning like a continuation of yesterday's confusion. It wakes up and immediately resumes old patterns of fear, complaint, anticipation, and judgment. It does not pause to ask whether these thoughts deserve to lead. It simply follows them. And in following them, it becomes reactive rather than rational. You must see this clearly. Your suffering is not only created by events outside you, it is shaped in the first moments of thought after you wake. Before any external challenge even arrives, your mind has already begun interpreting life in ways that weaken your stability. You expect difficulty before it appears. You assume failure before action. You rehearse frustration before anything has even gone wrong. This internal forecasting becomes the tone of your entire day. A disciplined life begins by refusing to accept thoughts at face value. Not all thoughts deserve agreement. Some are distorted by fear. Some are shaped by past pain. Some are repeated habits of interpretation that have never been corrected. If you treat every thought as guidance, you hand over your inner life to forces that have never been trained in reason. Examine what usually happens in your mornings. A thought appears about the day ahead and immediately your mood shifts. Without investigation, you accept it. You feel resistance before you even begin. You feel pressure before any task is placed in front of you. This is not reality speaking. This is unexamined interpretation speaking first. The disciplined mind interrupts this automatic flow. It does not rush into agreement. It observes each thought as it arrives and asks whether it deserves authority. This simple act of examination is what separates reaction from rational living. Without it, you are carried by mental habits you never consciously chose. Begin by recognizing that you are not your thoughts. You are the one who can observe them. This distinction is critical. If you confuse yourself with every passing mental impression, then fear becomes identity, anger becomes identity, doubt becomes identity. But if you see thoughts as events within the mind, rather than commands from truth, you regain the ability to choose your response. Each morning gives you a chance to correct your thinking before the world shapes it further. When you wake, do not immediately engage with noise, messages, or distraction. First, examine what is already present inside you. Ask what thoughts have already entered without permission. Not to suppress them, but to understand them. A thought such as "I cannot handle today" is not a fact. It is a judgment formed without evidence. A thought such as "everything will go wrong" is not insight. It is prediction shaped by anxiety. A thought such as "I am behind in life" is not truth. It is comparison mistaken for reality. These thoughts gain power only when left unchallenged. Your task is not to eliminate thinking, but to correct it. Correction begins by separating impression from truth. Ask of each thought whether it is based on what you can control or what you cannot. If it concerns something outside your control, then it cannot guide your action. If it concerns something within your control, then it must be refined through reason before you accept it. This morning discipline is not a ritual of positivity. It is a practice of clarity. You are not trying to feel good. You are trying to think correctly. A correct mind may still face difficulty, but it will not be confused about the nature of that difficulty. Confusion is what amplifies suffering. Clarity reduces it. When you examine your thoughts in the morning, you begin to see patterns. You notice how often your mind defaults to worst-case scenarios. You notice how quickly it labels discomfort as danger. You notice how easily it assumes judgment from others, even without evidence. These patterns are not truths, they are habits, and habits can be corrected, but correction requires willingness to pause before agreement. Most people never pause. They think quickly and accept quickly. They feel something and immediately believe it. This speed creates the illusion of accuracy. But speed without examination is how error becomes routine. You must slow the mind at the point of acceptance. A thought appears, and instead of following it instantly, you hold it in awareness. You ask, what exactly is being claimed here? You ask whether this claim is supported by reason or only by emotion. You ask whether acting on this thought would strengthen or weaken your character. This process is not complicated, but it is demanding. It requires honesty. It requires resisting the comfort of automatic thinking. The mind prefers familiar patterns, even when they are harmful, because familiarity feels safe. But safety built on illusion is not safety at all. It is vulnerability disguised as habit. As you practice morning examination, you begin to see how much of your inner life is constructed from unverified assumptions. You realize that many of your worries never had grounding in reality. They were projections. Many of your fears were anticipations of events that never occurred. Many of your frustrations were reactions to interpretations, not facts. Once you see this clearly, you can no longer treat your mind as infallible. You begin to understand that it requires guidance, not suppression, not punishment, but disciplined correction. Just as a physical body requires training to become strong, the mind requires consistent examination to become stable. During this morning practice, take one thought at a time. Do not overwhelm yourself by trying to fix everything at once. Focus on the most immediate impressions. Identify them clearly. Then ask whether they belong to reality or interpretation. If they belong to interpretation, refine them into something accurate. If they belong to what is outside your control, release them from authority. For example, if the thought arises that today will be overwhelming, you correct it by recognizing that you do not yet know what today contains. If the thought arises that you will fail at your responsibilities, you correct it by focusing only on what actions are within your control. Preparation, effort, attention, and honesty remain yours regardless of outcome. This correction is not denial of difficulty. It is refusal to distort it. A disciplined mind does not pretend life is easy. It simply refuses to exaggerate difficulty into impossibility. It sees things as they are, rather than as fear presents them. As you continue this practice daily, something important begins to shift. You become less reactive throughout the day because your mind has already been stabilized in the morning. You are no longer entering life with unchallenged assumptions. You are entering with examined awareness. You will also notice that emotional spikes become less controlling. When irritation appears, you recognize it earlier. When anxiety begins, you question its basis sooner. When doubt arises, you do not immediately accept its narrative. This creates space between thought and action, and in that space, reason can operate. This is where self-governance begins, not in controlling the world, but in controlling the acceptance of thoughts about the world. You cannot prevent impressions from appearing, but you can decide whether they deserve authority. That decision, repeated daily, is the foundation of mental discipline. At night, you must continue this examination. Review how your morning judgments influenced your actions. Identify where you accepted thoughts too quickly. Identify where interpretation replaced reality. Identify where fear spoke without correction. This evening reflection is not judgment against yourself. It is training in awareness. The purpose is not to achieve perfection in thinking. The purpose is to reduce unconscious thinking. Every time you notice a false judgment and correct it, you strengthen your ability to see clearly. Over time, clarity becomes more natural than confusion. A life without examination is a life ruled by inherited thinking. A life with examination is a life guided by reason. One reacts, the other chooses. One is carried, the other directs. The urgency of this practice cannot be overstated. Each day you delay examining your thoughts, you allow untrained thinking to shape your character further. But each day you commit to this discipline, you reclaim authority over your mind. You do not need to control every outcome in life to be steady. You only need to control the way you interpret what happens. And that control begins every morning, in the quiet moment before the world enters, when you decide whether your thoughts will rule you or whether you will examine and correct them before they take command. Number 5. Accept hardship as training for a stronger character. Pain arrives in your life, and your first instinct is to interpret it as something wrong, something unfair, something that should not be happening to you. You tighten against it, you complain inwardly, you resist the moment as if resistance itself could change reality. And in that resistance, the hardship does not disappear, it deepens. Not because the event is heavier than you can bear, but because your judgment turns it into something unbearable. You are not suffering only from what happens to you. You are suffering from what you think it means. A delay becomes disrespect. A setback becomes proof of failure. A difficulty becomes evidence that life is against you. These judgments are added on top of reality, and then you mistake the combined weight as unavoidable truth. But the hardship itself is often smaller than the story your mind builds around it. The undisciplined mind treats discomfort as injustice. It believes ease is the natural state, and anything that disturbs ease is an error in life. From this belief, every obstacle becomes personal, every challenge becomes a reason for complaint, every strain becomes a signal to withdraw. But a life shaped by avoidance is not a life of strength. It is a life of shrinking boundaries where comfort becomes the ruler and character is never tested. You must see clearly what hardship actually is. It is not an interruption of your development. It is the material of your development. Without resistance, there is no strengthening. Without pressure, there is no formation of character. Without difficulty, there is no evidence of discipline. The same way the body grows through controlled strain, the mind and character are shaped through challenges that force you to choose how you respond. Yet your habits likely reject this truth. When difficulty appears, your mind immediately searches for escape. It says this should not be happening. It says I need relief before I can continue. It says I cannot function under this pressure. But notice what is really being expressed. Not truth about your capability, but fear about discomfort. Not evidence of weakness, but rejection of training. Every time you accept these judgments without question, you turn training into suffering. You convert growth into resentment. You take something that could refine your character and transform it into emotional weight. The event remains the same, but your interpretation determines whether you grow stronger or remain fragile. Hardship is not asking for your approval. It is not waiting for your comfort before existing. It arrives regardless of your opinion. The only part that belongs to you is how you respond, and that response is where your character is formed. Not in ideal conditions, but in the exact moments you would prefer to avoid. You already know this in principle, yet you often abandon it in practice. When things become uncomfortable, your reasoning weakens and your emotions take authority. You stop asking what is the correct response and begin asking how do I escape this feeling? That shift alone determines whether you grow or stagnate. A disciplined mind does not ask how to remove difficulty first. It asks what this difficulty is shaping within me. It does not assume hardship is punishment. It considers whether hardship is instruction. Because the same event can destroy one person internally while strengthening another, the difference is not in the event itself, but in the interpretation of it. Look at how often you label situations as too much before you have even fully engaged with them. You feel pressure and assume incapacity. You feel resistance and assume inability. You feel fatigue and assume defeat. But these are not conclusions reached through reason. They are reactions formed by avoidance of discomfort, and avoidance always exaggerates danger because it seeks escape rather than understanding. The practice of acceptance begins by refusing to add unnecessary meaning to hardship. When difficulty appears, you do not immediately assign it a negative identity. You first observe it as raw experience. Something has changed, something is required, something must be faced. Only after clear observation do you decide how to respond. This moment of observation is where strength begins, because in that moment you are no longer reacting blindly. You are pausing long enough to prevent emotional interpretation from becoming final judgment. Most suffering is created in the instant when interpretation becomes identity. When I am experiencing difficulty becomes I am incapable. When I am facing pressure becomes I cannot handle life. You must break that conversion. Experience does not define character. Response defines character. Hardship does not reveal weakness. It reveals whether you have trained your mind to remain steady under pressure. Each morning you should prepare yourself for difficulty rather than expect ease, not in fear, but in readiness. Ask yourself what challenges might appear today and how you will respond with discipline rather than complaint. This is not prediction of suffering, it is training of perception. When you expect that life will require effort, you stop interpreting effort as violation. Throughout the day, when hardship appears, return to the distinction between what is yours and what is not. The difficulty itself is not fully yours. The external condition belongs to circumstances beyond control, but your response belongs entirely to you. Your patience belongs to you. Your judgment belongs to you. Your choice of action belongs to you. This separation removes confusion and restores clarity. Most people suffer twice, first from the event itself, and then from their resistance to it. They add frustration on top of difficulty and then believe the combined weight is the true reality. But if you remove resistance, what remains is simply a situation requiring response. Not something to fear endlessly, but something to meet with rational action. This does not mean you deny pain. It means you do not exaggerate it. Pain is part of physical and emotional experience, but suffering grows when you tell yourself that pain is wrong or meaningless or unbearable. When you stop adding judgment, pain becomes something you can observe and work through rather than something that defines you. There will be moments when hardship feels overwhelming. In those moments, your mind will attempt to collapse into complaint. It will try to convince you that endurance is impossible, that pause and withdrawal are necessary, that the situation should not exist. This is precisely the moment where discipline matters most, because this is the point where you decide whether hardship will weaken your character or strengthen it. If you choose complaint, you reinforce fragility. If you choose reasoned acceptance, you reinforce strength. Acceptance does not mean liking the situation, it means recognizing that reality is already here and must be met with rational action rather than resistance. When you accept hardship as training, you shift the entire meaning of difficulty. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin asking, "What is this developing within me?" Patience, endurance, clarity, self-control, emotional stability. These qualities cannot grow without resistance. They are not formed in comfort, they are revealed in challenge. You must also observe how avoidance has shaped much of your past behavior, how often you delayed necessary action because it felt uncomfortable, how often you abandoned effort because results were not immediate, how often you avoided confrontation with truth because it created emotional strain. Each avoidance strengthened the habit of fragility. Each acceptance of difficulty strengthens resilience. The disciplined life is not free from hardship. It is defined by a different relationship to hardship. Where others see interruption, you see training. Where others see punishment, you see development. Where others see reason to complain, you see opportunity to practice strength. At the end of each day, reflect honestly on how you responded to difficulty. Not to judge yourself harshly, but to understand your patterns. Where did you resist unnecessarily? Where did you interpret discomfort as failure? Where did you give emotional reaction more authority than rational response? Awareness of these moments is the beginning of change. Do not expect immediate transformation. The mind has been conditioned to avoid difficulty for a long time, but every time you choose acceptance over complaint, you weaken that conditioning. Every time you remain steady in discomfort, you reinforce character instead of fragility. Over time, something subtle but powerful begins to change. Situations that once felt overwhelming begin to feel manageable, not because they have become easier, but because you have stopped resisting them internally. You are no longer adding emotional distortion on top of reality. You are meeting reality directly. This is the essence of strength, not the absence of hardship, but the ability to remain steady within it. Not the removal of pressure, but the refusal to collapse under it. Not the avoidance of difficulty, but the disciplined acceptance that difficulty is the environment in which character is formed. When you live this way consistently, hardship loses its power to destabilize you. It becomes part of your training rather than a threat to your peace. And in that shift, you stop fearing life's demands and begin using them to build a mind that no longer breaks under pressure, but becomes clearer through it. Number 6. Govern your actions by reason, not by feeling. You already know the moment. Something happens, and before you have even understood it, your feelings have taken control. A comment lands in your direction, and irritation rises before reason can speak. A delay appears, and frustration spreads before clarity arrives. A desire forms, and suddenly your actions bend toward it without question. You are no longer choosing at that point, you are following. This is how a life loses direction. Not through one catastrophic mistake, but through thousands of small surrenders to feeling over reason. Each time you let emotion decide before judgment, you weaken your inner authority. Each time you act because something feels urgent rather than because it is correct, you teach your mind that impulse is more reliable than understanding. Feelings are not enemies. They are natural movements within you. But they are not leaders. They are not guides. They are signals that must be examined, not commands that must be obeyed. When you confuse emotion with instruction, your life begins to reflect instability rather than direction. You become reactive instead of deliberate. Look closely at your daily behavior. How many of your actions are chosen and how many are reactions? You may believe you are deciding freely, yet much of what you do is driven by momentary states. Hunger, irritation, anxiety, excitement, fatigue. Each one alters perception. Each one shifts your sense of what seems important. And if reason is not standing above them, then your life is being shaped by constantly changing internal weather. You must understand this clearly. Feelings are immediate but not necessarily accurate. They arise before reflection. They intensify before understanding. They demand attention without proving their correctness. Reason, on the other hand, is slower. It requires pause. It requires examination. It requires distance from impulse. That slowness is not weakness. It is the source of stability. A disciplined life begins when you refuse to let emotional intensity define truth. Just because something feels urgent does not mean it is important. Just because something feels offensive does not mean it is harmful. Just because something feels pleasurable does not mean it is beneficial. Feelings speak loudly, but they do not always speak truthfully. You have likely experienced how unreliable emotional decisions can be. In moments of anger, words are spoken that later require regret. In moments of fear, opportunities are avoided that later prove harmless. In moments of desire, choices are made that later feel unwise. Each of these outcomes is not caused by feeling itself, but by allowing feeling to replace reason. Reason does not eliminate emotion. It places it under guidance. It asks whether the impulse aligns with what is truly beneficial. It asks whether acting on this feeling will strengthen character or weaken it. It asks whether this response is consistent with a life governed by discipline or a life governed by fluctuation. The problem is not that you feel too much. The problem is that you rarely pause between feeling and action. That pause is where freedom exists. Without it, emotion becomes command. With it, emotion becomes information. Each morning, you should prepare your mind for this distinction. Before the day begins, remind yourself that feelings will arise, but they will not decide your actions. You will encounter irritation, but you will not let irritation speak first. You will encounter desire, but you will not let desire lead without examination. You will encounter discomfort, but you will not let discomfort define your choices. This preparation matters because the mind defaults to speed. It prefers immediate response over reflection. It treats emotional intensity as authority simply because it is strong. But strength of feeling is not strength of truth. It is only strength of signal. Signals must be interpreted, not obeyed blindly. Throughout the day, practice observing emotion without immediate reaction. When something triggers you, do not act instantly. Notice the feeling first. Name it internally without exaggeration. Then ask what judgment is forming beneath it. Is this anger based on actual harm or assumption? Is this fear based on present danger or imagined outcome? Is this desire aligned with reason or only with temporary satisfaction? This process creates space between impulse and action. In that space, you regain control. Without that space, control is already lost before you are aware of it. You must also recognize how often emotional reasoning disguises itself as truth. You feel disrespected and conclude that disrespect actually occurred. You feel incapable and conclude that incapability is real. You feel overwhelmed and conclude that you cannot continue. But none of these conclusions are proven by feeling. They are interpretations shaped by state of mind. A clear mind separates experience from interpretation. Experience is what is happening. Interpretation is what you say it means. Feelings belong to experience, but conclusions belong to reason. If you allow feelings to generate conclusions directly, you bypass the only faculty capable of accuracy. The disciplined person never denies feeling. They simply refuse to obey it unexamined. They acknowledge it as present, then subject it to reasoned inquiry. This is not suppression, it is governance. Suppression ignores, governance evaluates. Consider how differently your life would function if you acted only after examination rather than during impulse. Conversations would become more measured, decisions would become more stable, relationships would become less reactive. Regret would decrease because fewer actions would be driven by temporary states. You already know what it feels like to act under emotion and regret it later. That regret is not punishment, it is feedback showing that reason was absent at the moment of action. The goal is not to avoid feeling, but to ensure feeling does not become the final authority. Begin practicing a simple discipline. When a strong emotion appears, pause and refuse immediate action. This pause may feel uncomfortable at first because you are interrupting habit, but discomfort in this context is a sign of regained control, not loss of spontaneity. You are no longer being carried, you are choosing. In that pause, ask what would reason advise if emotion were quiet. Not what would bring immediate relief, but what would produce stability and integrity in the long term. This question shifts attention from impulse to direction. Over time, you will notice that emotions still arise, but they lose their authority over your behavior. Anger will still appear, but it will not automatically lead to speech. Fear will still appear, but it will not automatically lead to avoidance. Desire will still appear, but it will not automatically lead to action. There will be a gap between feeling and response, and in that gap you will find freedom. At night, examine your day with honesty. Identify moments where emotion governed action before reason could intervene. Do not use this reflection to judge yourself harshly. Use it to sharpen awareness. Notice patterns, notice triggers, notice where you consistently lose control to impulse. Awareness is the beginning of correction. The goal is not perfection. The goal is increasing governance. Each day where reason intervenes even once more than before is progress. Each moment where you pause instead of reacting is training. Each action guided by clarity rather than impulse strengthens your inner structure. You must also understand that reason is not cold detachment. It is clarity aligned with what is truly beneficial for character. Sometimes reason will align with restraint. Sometimes it will align with action. Sometimes it will align with patience. Sometimes it will align with direct speech. What remains constant is that it is not dictated by momentary feeling but by considered understanding. If you continue living under emotional governance, your life will remain unpredictable, not because the world is chaotic, but because your reactions will be. Stability cannot arise from constant fluctuation. It arises from consistent inner authority. The disciplined mind is not one that never feels. It is one that never allows feeling to replace judgment. It observes emotion, understands it, and then chooses response through reason. That is how character becomes steady. That is how decisions become reliable. That is how self-respect becomes real rather than imagined. Every day will continue presenting moments where emotion asks to lead, and every day will offer the same opportunity to pause, to examine, to choose. And in choosing reason over impulse repeatedly, you stop living as a reaction to circumstances and begin living as a governed mind acting with intention. That is where true strength begins. Number 7. Endure insult without surrendering your own self-respect. An insult enters your awareness and something inside you immediately tightens, not because the words have power over your character, but because your mind has already rushed to interpret them as a threat to your worth. In that instant, before reason has time to stand, you feel the pull to defend, to react, to strike back, to prove something. But what exactly is being defended, and why does it feel so fragile in the first place? You are not wounded by the insult itself. You are wounded by the judgment you attach to it. A stranger speaks, a colleague dismisses, a friend criticizes, and your mind instantly converts their words into a verdict about you. You accept their language as if it were authority over your inner value. Then you begin to suffer not from what was said, but from what you decided it must mean. This is where most people lose themselves, not in the moment of insult, but in the moment of interpretation. They assume that every negative word must contain truth, or at least danger. They assume that silence would mean weakness, and retaliation would mean strength. But both assumptions are unstable, because neither reaction has been examined through reason. A disciplined mind sees insult differently. It does not rush to accept it as truth. It does not rush to reject it as injustice. It first pauses and separates what belongs to the speaker from what belongs to the self. The words belong to them. The interpretation belongs to you. The emotional reaction belongs to your judgment, and only your judgment is within your control. If you lose sight of this separation, you become vulnerable to every passing opinion. Anyone can disturb your inner stability with a sentence. Anyone can alter your mood with a tone. Anyone can unsettle your confidence with a remark, not because they have authority over you, but because you have granted their words authority within your mind. Self-respect is not the absence of insult. It is the refusal to let insult redefine your character. A person with strong self-respect does not need to destroy every criticism directed at them. They examine it, they filter it, they decide whether it contains truth or merely noise. and in doing so they remain stable regardless of how others speak. You must observe how quickly the mind seeks validation through reaction. When insult appears, the instinct is to restore balance by retaliation or explanation, but this instinct is driven by emotional discomfort, not rational necessity. It says I must respond immediately or I will lose value. But value is not something that increases or decreases based on verbal exchange. It is determined by the quality of your actions and your alignment with reason. When someone insults you, you are given a choice that most people fail to recognize. You can accept their words as defining truth, or you can treat them as external noise that does not require internal disturbance. The difference between these two responses is not in the insult itself, but in the judgment you attach to it. If you react without examination, you allow external voices to enter your inner authority. If you pause and examine, you reclaim that authority. This pause is not avoidance, it is governance. It is the moment where you refuse to let emotion dictate meaning before reason has spoken. You will notice that insult often triggers a desire to protect image. The mind says, I must not appear weak. I must correct this perception. I must ensure they understand my value. But this concern is rooted in dependency on external opinion. It assumes that self-worth is something negotiated through others rather than something maintained through internal discipline. A stronger approach is to detach self-worth from external interpretation entirely. Ask yourself whether your actions were guided by reason and integrity. If they were, then insult cannot alter their value. If they were not, then correction should come from within, not from emotional reaction to others. You are not responsible for how others perceive you. You are responsible for whether your actions align with what is right. When you shift focus from reputation to conduct, insult loses its authority. It becomes something external that passes without shaping internal stability. But this requires training, because the mind is accustomed to taking things personally. It interprets criticism as identity attack rather than information. It hears disagreement as rejection rather than perspective. It hears disapproval as danger rather than opinion. This habitual interpretation must be questioned every time it arises. When insult occurs, practice immediate internal separation. First, observe the words as external events. Then, observe the emotional reaction within you. Then, examine the judgment forming beneath the reaction. Ask whether this judgment is necessary or accurate. Most of the time, it is neither. It is a reflex built from past sensitivity, not present truth. If the insult contains truth, reason will allow correction without emotional collapse. If it contains falsehood, reason will allow dismissal without disturbance. In both cases, the key is not reaction but examination. Without examination, both truth and falsehood create unnecessary suffering. You must also confront how often you insult yourself internally without noticing. The external insult is only powerful because it echoes internal judgments you already repeat. If you already believe you are insufficient, criticism will feel like confirmation. If you already depend on approval, rejection will feel like injury. The external world often only amplifies what your internal world has already accepted. This is why strengthening self-respect must begin internally, not through defiance of others, but through correction of self-judgment. When your internal voice becomes rational and fair, external insults lose their ability to destabilize you. They no longer match your internal narrative, so they fail to penetrate deeply. Each morning, prepare for interaction with others by reinforcing this distinction. Remind yourself that you will encounter opinions that are not yours, judgments that are not accurate, and interpretations that are not fair. Your task is not to prevent them, but to govern your response to them. This preparation reduces surprise and strengthens composure. Throughout the day when insult or criticism appears, slow your response. Do not rush to speak. Do not rush to defend. Do not rush to agree. Pause long enough for reason to enter. Ask what exactly has been said and whether it reflects truth or only perspective. Then decide your response based on clarity rather than impulse. You will begin to notice that many insults lose their weight when examined carefully. Some are projections of the speaker's frustration. Some are misunderstandings. Some are irrelevant opinions presented as certainty. Only a small portion may contain useful correction. And even that correction can be accepted without emotional collapse if you understand that improvement does not equal worthlessness. At night, review how you responded to external judgment. Identify moments where you reacted too quickly. Identify where emotional disturbance replaced rational evaluation. This reflection is not for self-punishment. It is for strengthening awareness of where control was lost. Over time, your relationship with criticism will transform. Instead of immediate defensiveness, you will experience observation. Instead of emotional escalation, you will experience evaluation. Instead of identity collapse, you will experience clarity. Insult will no longer dictate your inner state, because your inner state will no longer depend on external approval. Self-respect becomes stable not when others stop criticizing you, but when you stop surrendering your inner judgment to their words. It becomes stable when your sense of worth is rooted in your own disciplined conduct, rather than in fluctuating opinions. It becomes stable when reason, not reaction, determines how you interpret the world. There will still be moments of discomfort when insult occurs. That is natural. But discomfort does not require surrender. It can be observed, examined, and released without allowing it to define you. The strength lies not in never feeling the impact of words, but in refusing to let those words govern your identity. If you practice this consistently, something profound begins to shift. You stop living in defensive posture. You stop preparing constant emotional counter-arguments in your mind. You stop needing to correct every perception others hold of you. Instead, you focus on living in accordance with reason and virtue, regardless of how it is interpreted. And in that state, insult loses its power entirely. Not because the world has changed, but because your mind has learned the difference between external noise and internal truth. Number 8. Practice small daily wins to build steady confidence. Confidence does not collapse in a single moment. It erodes quietly when you repeatedly ignore the small duties that are fully within your control. You do not wake up one day suddenly lacking self-respect. You arrive there through countless days where you promised action and chose avoidance, where you knew the right thing and postponed it, where you felt resistance and obeyed it instead of reason. This is how the mind weakens itself. Not through great failures, but through neglected small actions. Each time you avoid a simple discipline, you send a message to yourself that your own intention cannot be trusted. Each time you abandon a small responsibility, you reinforce the belief that effort is optional when discomfort appears. Over time, this creates an inner instability that no external success can fully repair. You are not lacking confidence because life is too difficult. You are lacking steady confidence because your daily conduct has not trained your mind to trust itself. Confidence is not built in rare achievements. It is built in repeated alignment between intention and action in ordinary moments. The undisciplined mind waits for large victories to feel worthy. It believes that confidence will arrive after a major transformation, a big success, or external recognition. But this expectation ignores the structure of character. Character is not formed in dramatic moments. It is formed in small decisions repeated consistently when no one is watching and no reward is guaranteed. Every day presents you with opportunities to either strengthen or weaken your trust in yourself. getting up when you said you would, completing what you started even when interest fades, speaking truthfully in small interactions, resisting unnecessary indulgence. These are not minor actions, they are training grounds for self-governance. When you ignore these moments, you do not remain neutral, you move backward. Each neglected small duty teaches the mind that discomfort overrides intention. Each unkept promise to yourself reduces internal trust. And a mind that does not trust itself cannot experience stable confidence, no matter how much external validation it receives. You must understand that confidence is not a feeling that arrives first. It is a result that follows action aligned with reason. It is the natural outcome of repeatedly acting in accordance with what you know is correct. When your behavior consistently reflects your principles, your mind no longer questions your reliability. Stability emerges from this consistency. Begin by observing how often your intentions exceed your actions. You plan more than you execute. You decide more than you follow through. You imagine more than you practice. This gap between intention and execution is where confidence is lost. Not because intention is weak, but because it is not reinforced by consistent completion. Small daily wins are not trivial. They are the foundation of inner trust. When you complete a simple task that you previously avoided, you prove to yourself that resistance can be overcome. When you maintain discipline in a small area, you strengthen your ability to do so in larger areas. The mind learns through repetition, not through inspiration. Each morning, you should define actions that are fully within your control and commit to completing them regardless of mood. Not actions that depend on outcome, but actions that depend only on effort. This distinction is essential. If you tie your confidence to results, you surrender it to forces outside your control. If you tie it to effort, you keep it within your governance. The disciplined approach begins by narrowing focus. Instead of overwhelming yourself with broad ambitions, you identify specific actions that can be completed today. These actions must be simple enough that failure is not caused by circumstance, but by choice alone. This removes excuses and clarifies responsibility. When resistance appears, do not negotiate with it. Observe it. The mind will suggest delay, distraction, or avoidance. It will attempt to justify inaction through temporary discomfort. But discomfort is not a valid reason to abandon reasoned intention. It is simply a sensation that must be endured while action is completed. The practice is not about intensity, it is about consistency. A single completed small action is more valuable for confidence than multiple abandoned large intentions, because it reinforces reliability. It proves that your word to yourself carries weight. And internal reliability is the root of self-respect. You must also examine how often your inner dialogue undermines small efforts before they begin. The mind says this is too minor to matter, or this will not make a difference, or I will start later when conditions are better. These judgments are not rational assessments. They are avoidance strategies disguised as reasoning. Their purpose is not truth, but escape from effort. Each time you accept these thoughts without examination, you reinforce passivity. Each time you challenge them and act anyway, you strengthen agency. The difference between a disciplined mind and an undisciplined one is not the absence of resistance, but the response to it. Throughout the day, focus on completing tasks at the moment they appear, instead of delaying them into vague future time. Delay weakens resolve because it disconnects intention from execution. Immediate action strengthens confidence because it compresses intention and reality into one continuous act. When you complete a small task, pause briefly and acknowledge the fact of completion without exaggeration. Do not seek external validation for it. The value lies in internal consistency, not recognition. This quiet acknowledgement reinforces awareness that you are capable of following through. When you fail to act, do not fall into self-condemnation. Instead, observe the pattern clearly. Identify the point where intention broke. Was it distraction, resistance, or emotional discomfort? Understanding failure is part of correcting it, but repeating it without awareness is how habits of weakness form. Evening reflection is essential. At the end of each day, examine where you acted in alignment with your intention and where you did not. This is not a moral judgment. It is a technical review of behavior. You are studying the accuracy of your self-governance. Where did you maintain discipline? Where did you lose it? Why did that loss occur? This daily examination transforms experience into training. Without reflection, days pass without learning. With reflection, even failures become material for improvement. The mind becomes increasingly aware of its own patterns, and awareness is the foundation of correction. You will begin to notice a shift over time. Small wins accumulate into a sense of internal stability, not because anything external has changed, but because your mind begins to trust your own behavior. Confidence becomes less dependent on outcomes and more rooted in consistency. You will also notice that hesitation decreases. When you know you usually act on your intentions, resistance loses influence. The mind stops debating every small action because it has learned through repetition that you follow through regardless. This reduces internal conflict and increases clarity. The goal is not perfection in execution. The goal is reliable alignment between what you decide and what you do. Even imperfect action strengthens confidence if it reflects your intention. Inaction, even when justified emotionally, weakens it if it contradicts what you know is right. As this practice deepens, you stop viewing yourself as someone who occasionally succeeds at discipline. You begin to see yourself as someone who follows through as a default. This identity shift is the foundation of steady confidence, not based on comparison but on internal evidence gathered through repeated action. You no longer wait for motivation to act. You no longer rely on external pressure to move. You act because your intention has become trustworthy, and intention becomes trustworthy only through repeated fulfillment in small moments. A life built on small daily wins does not appear dramatic from the outside, but internally it creates unshakable stability, because the mind learns that it can depend on itself, and a mind that can depend on itself does not collapse easily under pressure. This is the path to steady confidence, not sudden transformation, but repeated alignment, not large declarations, but small completed actions. Not imagined strength, but proven reliability built one decision at a time. Number 9. Choose virtue in every act and speech. Every time you speak, and every time you act, you are either strengthening your inner order or weakening it. There is no neutral ground in the formation of character. Each choice either aligns you with reason or pulls you toward impulse. And most people do not notice this because they think virtue is something reserved for rare moments of crisis. But in truth, virtue is tested in ordinary speech, in small decisions, in unnoticed reactions that shape who you become when no one is watching. You may believe your suffering comes from external events, from the behavior of others, from the unpredictability of life, but much of your inner disturbance comes from something closer. It comes from moments where you chose reaction over reflection, complaint over clarity, impulse over principle. Each time you acted without virtue, even in small ways, you added disorder to your inner life. And that disorder accumulates quietly until it becomes the tone of your entire existence. To choose virtue in every act and speech means to place reason above immediate impulse at all times, not sometimes, not when convenient, at all times, because the moment you allow exceptions, you begin to fracture your own standard, and a fractured standard cannot guide a stable life. It becomes inconsistent, and inconsistency produces confusion. You already know how easily speech becomes careless when unchecked. Words spoken in anger, words spoken to impress, words spoken to avoid discomfort. Each of these moments feels small at the time, yet each one reveals whether reason is governing you or whether you are being carried by emotional reaction. Speech is not only communication, it is a reflection of inner discipline. When you speak without virtue, you often notice the consequences later. A misunderstanding created, a relationship strained, a truth distorted, a regret forming in hindsight. But the real damage is not only external, the deeper effect is internal. Every unvirtuous action teaches your mind that discipline is optional, and once discipline becomes optional, it loses authority. Virtue is not abstract morality. It is the alignment of your actions with reasoned understanding of what is right in each situation. It requires you to pause before acting and ask whether your response is guided by impulse or by clarity, whether your words will contribute to understanding or merely release emotion, whether your behavior reflects integrity or temporary convenience. Most people speak and act from immediate feeling. If they are irritated, they express irritation. If they are pleased, they exaggerate. If they are uncertain, they avoid. If they are pressured, they conform. This creates a life where behavior is determined by changing internal states rather than stable principles, and a life governed by changing states cannot produce steady peace. You must begin observing how often your speech serves emotion rather than truth. When you exaggerate to gain approval, when you remain silent to avoid discomfort, when you speak sharply to release frustration, none of these are guided by virtue. They are reactions shaped by momentary pressure, and each reaction moves you further from inner stability. Virtue requires a different approach. Before speaking or acting, you pause and ask what is the correct response, independent of emotional state. Not what will satisfy the moment, but what will maintain integrity. Not what will protect image, but what will reflect truth. Not what will avoid discomfort, but what will preserve rational clarity. This pause is where transformation begins, because in that moment you are no longer reacting automatically. You are choosing consciously. You are allowing reason to evaluate impulse before it becomes action. And that evaluation is what separates disciplined living from reactive existence. You must also recognize how often your mind justifies unvirtuous actions after the fact. It says, "I was tired, I was provoked, I had no choice, I needed to respond that way." These explanations feel reasonable in the moment, but they are often attempts to escape responsibility for the loss of self-governance. They shift blame to conditions rather than acknowledging that a different response was possible. Virtue removes this escape. It holds you accountable to your own rational capacity regardless of condition. It says that even under pressure, even under discomfort, even under emotional disturbance, you still possess the ability to pause and choose a response aligned with reason. This is not about perfection. It is about responsibility. Each morning, you should prepare yourself for this responsibility. Before entering the day, remind yourself that you will encounter situations that challenge your patience, your honesty, your restraint, and your clarity. You will not be able to control these situations, but you will be able to control your response to them. That is where virtue lives. When the day begins, set a simple internal commitment. In every act and every speech, you will attempt to choose the rational and honorable response rather than the impulsive one, not because it will always feel easy, but because it will always preserve your inner order. Throughout the day, you must practice observation of your own behavior. When you are about to speak, pause briefly and examine your intention. Are you speaking to inform or to impress? Are you responding to understand or to dominate? Are you acting from clarity or from emotional pressure? This examination slows down reaction and restores choice. In moments of conflict, this practice becomes even more important. The mind will urge you to react quickly to defend yourself or assert yourself. But virtue does not require immediate reaction. It requires appropriate reaction, and appropriateness can only be determined through brief reflection, not impulse. When you feel the urge to act unvirtuously, recognize it without judgment and allow reason to evaluate it. This does not mean suppressing emotion. It means preventing emotion from becoming the sole authority. Emotion can exist without governing behavior. You can feel anger without speaking from anger. You can feel desire without acting from desire. You can feel fear without surrendering to avoidance. The discipline lies in maintaining this separation consistently. Over time, your reactions begin to slow, not because you are less alive, but because you are more aware. Awareness creates space, and space allows reason to operate. Without space, impulse dominates. You must also be honest about the cost of unvirtuous speech. Every time you speak without consideration, you risk weakening trust, clarity, and self-respect. Even if others do not notice immediately, you notice internally. A part of you recognizes when you have acted below your own standard, and repeated violations of that standard slowly erode inner confidence. Virtue, on the other hand, strengthens self-respect because it aligns action with reason. Even when outcomes are uncertain, even when recognition is absent, even when difficulty is present, you maintain internal consistency, and that consistency becomes the foundation of a stable mind. At night, reflect on your conduct without distortion. Review your speech and actions honestly. Where did you act from impulse instead of reason? Where did you speak without clarity? Where did you allow emotion to override principle? Do not use this reflection to punish yourself. Use it to refine awareness. Correction requires honesty, not avoidance. Over time, you will notice a shift in how you experience yourself. You will begin to trust your actions more because they are increasingly guided by principle rather than reaction. You will speak with more precision because your words are no longer driven by emotional excess. You will act with more stability because your decisions are less dependent on fluctuating internal states. Virtue becomes less of an effort and more of a habit. Not because temptation disappears, but because reason becomes stronger than impulse. You no longer need to debate every action internally for long periods. You recognize situations more clearly and respond more consistently in alignment with your principles. This is how inner freedom is built, not through control of external events, but through control of internal response, not through perfection, but through consistent alignment with reason in speech and action, not through avoiding difficulty, but through choosing discipline within it. When you choose virtue in every act and speech, you are not aiming to appear good in the eyes of others. You are aiming to remain internally coherent, and that coherence is what produces a life that does not fracture under pressure. The world will continue to present situations that test you, conversations that provoke you, circumstances that challenge you, but none of these define your character. Only your response does, and your response is shaped moment by moment through the choice between impulse and reason. Each time you choose reason, you strengthen the foundation of your character. Each time you choose impulse, you weaken it. Over time, these small choices determine whether your life is governed by instability or by disciplined clarity. Virtue is not an occasional achievement. It is a continuous practice of aligning action and speech with rational understanding, and in that practice, you build a life that is no longer dependent on external approval or internal chaos, but grounded in steady self-governance guided by reason alone. Number 10. Remember death so you stop wasting your life. You move through your days as if time is guaranteed to you, as if there is always another chance to correct what you delay. as if the future is a stable place waiting for your arrival. But this assumption is never proven. It is only repeated. And repetition is not truth, it is habit. You postpone what you know should be done. You delay honest conversations. You avoid difficult actions. You waste attention on what does not matter. And in the background of all of this, you act as if there is an unlimited reserve of time available for correction later. But no one ever receives that guarantee, not even for a single day. Remembering death is not an exercise in fear. It is an exercise in clarity. It strips away the illusion that time is abundant and forces you to see that every moment is already being spent, not saved, not stored, spent. And once spent, it does not return in any form. Most of your wasteful behavior does not come from ignorance of what is right. It comes from the belief that there will always be later. Later to improve yourself. Later to correct your habits. Later to speak honestly. Later to act with discipline. This imagined later weakens urgency and dissolves action into delay. But when you hold the awareness that your life is not indefinitely expandable, your priorities begin to shift. You stop negotiating endlessly with your responsibilities. You stop treating your own improvement as optional. You begin to see that every avoidance is not harmless delay, but loss of time that cannot be recovered. The mind resists this awareness because it disrupts comfort. It prefers the illusion of endless time because it allows avoidance without immediate consequence. But avoidance is still a decision. It is a decision to trade present action for imagined future opportunity. And that trade is made without any guarantee that the future will exist in the way you assume. When you remember that life is finite, you begin to see how much energy is wasted on what does not matter, complaints that serve no purpose, comparisons that produce no benefit, distractions that leave no lasting value, emotional reactions that pass quickly but consume attention that could have been used for deliberate action. You are not lacking time. You are losing it in fragments you do not notice. Each unnecessary hesitation, each unexamined distraction, each avoided responsibility removes a small piece of the only resource that truly belongs to you. And because these losses are small and repeated, they feel insignificant in isolation while becoming significant in accumulation. Awareness of mortality does not demand despair. It demands precision. It demands that you become careful with how you use your attention, your energy, and your choices. It forces you to distinguish between what is meaningful and what is merely habitual, between what contributes to a disciplined life and what only fills it without direction. When you begin each day, you should do so with the understanding that this day is not guaranteed to repeat. Not as a dramatic thought, but as a grounding fact. This does not mean rushing. It means acting with intention. It means removing unnecessary delay between decision and execution. It means treating time as something that is already being used, rather than something that can be stored. Throughout the day, you must observe how often you act as if time is abundant. You scroll without purpose. You postpone decisions without necessity. You remain in patterns that you already recognize as unproductive. Each of these actions is not just habit. It is a quiet denial of urgency. When urgency is absent, discipline weakens. When discipline weakens, life becomes reactive instead of intentional. And when life becomes reactive, you are no longer directing your time. You are simply moving through it without clear governance. To counter this, you must repeatedly return to the question of whether your current action deserves the time it is taking, not from anxiety, but from clarity. Is this conversation necessary? Is this delay justified? Is this distraction aligned with what you claim to value? These questions reintroduce awareness into moments where habit would otherwise dominate. Remembering death also clarifies relationships. It reduces the importance of petty conflict and unnecessary pride. It exposes how much energy is wasted in defending ego instead of building understanding. When time is seen as limited, the need to be right in every moment loses significance compared to the need to live rightly. This awareness also reveals how often you wait for external conditions to become ideal before acting. You wait for motivation, for confidence, for approval, for clarity that never fully arrives. But life does not pause for optimal conditions. It continues regardless of your readiness. And if you continue waiting, you simply spend time without direction. The disciplined mind does not wait for perfect states. It acts within imperfect conditions because it understands that postponement is itself a form of loss. Not all action will be comfortable, not all effort will feel aligned, but delay does not improve clarity. Action does. At night, reflection becomes essential. You examine how your time was used, not with regret, but with honesty. Where did you act with intention? Where did you drift into avoidance? Where did you allow unnecessary habits to consume attention? This reflection is not about judgment. It is about awareness of how life is actually being spent. Without this awareness, days blend into each other without meaningful change. With it, each day becomes a point of correction, a chance to refine how you use the limited resource you are given. Over time, this creates a sharper sense of direction in even the smallest actions. As this practice deepens, something important begins to shift. You stop treating improvement as something distant. You begin to act immediately on what you know is necessary, not because pressure increases, but because awareness increases. The gap between recognition and action narrows. You also begin to notice that many of your previous concerns were inflated by assumption of endless time. Problems that seemed overwhelming lose weight when seen against the reality that time itself is limited and must be used wisely. This does not eliminate difficulty. It places it in proper perspective. Remembering death does not remove life's challenges. It removes unnecessary delay in facing them. It removes the illusion that there will always be another moment more suitable than the present one. It returns you to the only place where action is possible, which is now. When you live with this awareness consistently, your relationship with time changes fundamentally. You become more deliberate without becoming anxious. You become more focused without becoming rigid. You become more present because you are no longer assuming endless extension of opportunity. Wasting life is not only about large failures or obvious mistakes. It is also about the accumulation of small, ignored opportunities, small acts of discipline avoided, small truths unspoken, small responsibilities delayed. Each one individually seems minor. Together they define the shape of a life. To remember death is to see those moments clearly while they are still available for correction. It is to recognize that the present moment is not preparation for life. It is life itself being used in real time, and how it is used determines the quality of everything that follows. When this understanding becomes steady, urgency is no longer forced. It becomes natural. You stop asking whether you should act and begin focusing on how to act well. You stop drifting through time and begin directing it with intention. In this way, awareness of mortality does not end life. It clarifies it. It removes distraction. It reduces hesitation. It strengthens commitment to what matters. And it brings you back, again and again, to the simple truth that nothing is promised except this moment that is already passing as you live it.